Hello, my name's Julian Cox. I'm the Scientific Director of the Food Safety Information Council, and today I'm going to talk to you about food preservation, particularly food preservation involving the use of glass. The preservation of food has been part of civilization since the dawn of time, as we see in the historical record. And from those earliest days, a range of techniques have been used to preserve food or extend shelf life. And they include cooking, and in particular heating of food, drying, salting, pickling, and fermentation. And I think many of us are aware from that historical record that various vessels were used to conduct preservation and to store the products of preservation. So many of us would have seen something like these clay jars. And in terms of vessels that can be used, and in fact are still used today, they can range from something as simple as banana leaves to those good old clay pots and everything in between. But today we're just going to focus on one particularly important material, and that's glass. Now, glass has a history of around 5,000 years, but when glass first started to be produced, it was really more for decorative purposes rather than storage. And of course, today we make widespread use of glass as a storage material. Why? It's inert, so it doesn't react with many things. It's impermeable, unlike paper or wood. It's transparent, so we can see the products that are inside it. It's flexible in the sense that we can design glass in various ways to suit our purposes. So we can design with regard to shape and also with regard to color, for example. So we can use plain glass, clear glass, or colored glass. And this goes not only to the look of the product, but also to the function. So in some cases, colored glass is important to preserve the quality of the product that's stored within it. Glass also affords us a multiply sensory experience, from that shape and color to the feel of glass. And often glass is seen or felt as a premium receptacle for food products. It also, through careful design, serves as a marketing tool for the product that's being sold. And of course, importantly these days, glass is highly recyclable. Let's bring the two together and talk about preservation in glass and put preservation under the glass. A reminder that preservation is primarily about extending shelf life. Take this simple example of the strawberry. A fresh strawberry will only last for several days at best. But if we make strawberry jam from those fresh strawberries, we have a product that will last for months, if not years. What are we doing when we undertake the process of preservation? Well, basically, we're putting in front of the microorganisms that can be responsible for spoilage one or more hurdles that prevent growth or even destroy those organisms. And really, preservation today reflects the same principles that people were using those centuries ago in ancient times. That we can take advantage of one or more of these factors. The use of temperature, high or low today, the use of salt, the use of pH to create an acidic environment, the control of water activity or moisture through processes like drying, evaporation, or even the binding of water by using solutes in our preservation, such as sugar, and also by controlling the atmosphere, in particular, excluding air. Now, what about fermentation? Once again, fermentation as a subset of preservation is about the extension of shelf life. But perhaps more importantly, fermentation affords us the ability to enhance the sensory experience of foods by providing an extensive diversity of products, that through the use of fermentation, we can produce a diversity of tastes, of flavor, aroma, texture, appearance, and even the oral sense. We can also use fermentation to remove undesirable components of food, such as the bitter components that come with olives, or to increase nutritive value. So by releasing nutrients, or indeed adding nutrients such as protein through the growth of microorganisms during the fermentation process. So during fermentation, we're aiming to achieve not one, but two things. One is to put in place those same hurdles as with other preservation processes that prevent the growth of harmful organisms, spoilage organisms, or disease-causing organisms, but also because we need organisms to conduct the fermentation, we also at the same time want to provide conditions that allow for the free growth of the desirable organisms. And so to achieve preservation through fermentation, we can use these same factors that I've mentioned before, temperature, salt, and so forth, to enact those two aspects of preservation, to minimize the growth of the bad organisms, but also to promote the growth of the good organisms. And at the same time then, through fermentation, through the growth of those good organisms, they can also contribute to the preservation of the food through, for example, the addition of acid through their growth. So to conduct fermentation, we really need a series of materials. Of course, we need the vessel, and in this case, we can think about glass as that vessel. We need the substrate or matrix, and of course, that's the food. And it's the food not only for us, but also the food in itself, or with additions, the food for the microorganisms that are going to conduct the fermentation, such as salt. And speaking of microorganisms, we can exploit them in a few ways. One is to use the natural organisms or the microflora that is present on the food and select for the good organisms that can conduct the fermentation. Or indeed, we can add organisms. We refer to these as starter cultures. These are organisms that can then initiate the fermentation in a much more efficient way. And in terms of the organisms we use, in some cases, it can be as simple as a single organism. And in other cases, we can use an extremely diverse community of a wide range of types of organisms in succession to actually conduct the full fermentation. Now, importantly, from a food safety perspective, it really is key that if you're undertaking preservation and fermentation, that you follow the recipe, because the recipe is not only about ingredients and making something taste good, but it's also about the rules of ensuring that we're making a safe product. So if we can think of a product like kimchi, an interesting fermented food, that there are a range of ingredients that are involved in making it to give it its characteristic sensory qualities. But perhaps the most important ingredient is the one that you see at the center of this image, and that's salt. That salt is used to do those two things that I mentioned earlier. One is to help control the bad organisms that might be present in our ingredients as we make the kimchi, but also to promote the growth of the beneficial, the good organisms that conduct the fermentation, that actually make the kimchi the fermented product that we enjoy. So if we follow the rules when it comes to preservation and fermentation, and things go right, we end up with a diversity of truly enjoyable food products. But of course, if we don't follow the rules, when things go wrong, we put ourselves and others at risk. And this may involve the survival of bad organisms that could cause simple food poisoning, or indeed, given that we're extending shelf life, through that extended storage of a product, we may, if we haven't done things right, allow for the outgrowth of organisms that can actually be life-threatening. An organism like Clostridium botulinum that causes the disease botulism that can be fatal. So again, follow those rules. So to summarize, preservation has a long history, dating back to the dawn of civilization, and the aim of preservation is to extend shelf life and, particularly in the case of fermentation, to provide us with a diversity of products. One of the materials that we can use for the conduct of preservation and fermentation and the storage of products after process is glass. And it is a material that has wonderful material characteristics that match to the processes and allow us to produce products, including premium products. And finally, to reiterate two very important points, you must do preservation right. Follow the rules, follow the recipes, because any missteps could be very costly to you and others. Thank you very much for your attention, and I hope I have the opportunity to answer any questions that you might have.